Russian attacks continue in war-torn Ukraine, with its forces now targeting capital Kyiv again. In the latest, Kremlin fired multiple missiles into Kyiv on Thursday. The attacks took place while the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres was visiting Kyiv. The rockets hit the central Shevchenko district. One of them struck the lower floors of a 25-story building, and 10 people have been injured in the incident. Remember, Kremlin had pulled back its troops from the capital in early April. But the shelling highlights how Kyiv remains vulnerable to Russian attacks. The latest blast happened right after Guterres wrapped up his meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who admitted that the United Nations Security Council failed to do everything in its power to prevent and even end the war.
The Security Council failed to do everything in its power to prevent and end this war.
Guterres also assured that the United Nations is doing everything possible to ensure an immediate ceasefire and reiterated the absurdity of war in the 21st century. Meanwhile, lashed out against the attacks on the capital, with Ukrainian Foreign Minister condemning the bombardment as a heinous act of barbarism by the Kremlin, highlighting that it once again demonstrated Russian attitude towards Ukraine, Europe and the world. Zelensky has pointed out that after the latest attacks, it has been proved that Ukrainians must not drop their guard.
Російські ракетні удари по Україні, по Києву, Фастову, Одесі, Хмельницькому та іншим містам вкотре засвідчують, ще не можна розслаблятись, не можна думати, нібито війна вже закінчується, нам ще потрібно боротись, ще потрібно гнати окупантів.
Discussions between Zelensky and Guterres focused on evacuating Ukrainian fighters and civilians hauled up in a steel plant in Mariupol. On Tuesday, Putin had agreed to the involvement of the UN and the Red Cross to evacuate the plant. Ukrainian officials worry that Russia wants to capture those trapped inside. However, Russia has continued to deny this allegation. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden has asked Congress for a $33 billion support to Kyiv. This is a massive jump in funding, which includes over $20 billion of weapons, ammunition, and other military aid. The package intends to cover the needs through September.
Just signed a request to Congress for critical security, economic, and humanitarian assistance to help Ukraine continue to counter Putin's aggression, and at a very pivotal moment. We need this bill to support Ukraine in this fight for freedom, and our NATO allies, our EU partners, they're going to pay their fair share of the cost as well, but we have to do this. We have to do our part as well, leading the alliance. The cost of this fight is not cheap. But caving to aggression is going to be more costly if we allow it to happen.
The United States has also sent anti-tank weapons to Ukraine, this after Kyiv called for aid against Russian assault. President Joe Biden confirmed the added aid to Ukrainian defense.
The United States alone has provided 10 anti-armor systems for every Russian tank that is in Ukraine, 10 to 1.
As the United States and Europe increasingly heed Zelensky's call for heavier firepower, Moscow continues to target West-supplied arms in Ukraine. Russia's defense ministry said that its troops have fired missiles at 6 arms and fuel depots in Ukraine and destroyed them, and stated that Russian forces had hit 76 Ukrainian military facilities in total. Well, for more on this, joining us live from Riga in Latvia is our correspondent William Denslow. William, good to see you. President Zelensky and also Guterres blasted the United Nations Security Council for failing to do everything in its power to prevent and even end the war. Is this a concern of the Security Council's role in the war shared in the region?
Well, that's the message from Secretary-General Antonio Guterres speaking with Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. He said that when it came to the issue of the inaction from the Security Council to help prevent or stop this war, he said that he felt a great disappointment, frustration as well as anger. Of course, there have been plenty of fingers pointed at the Security Council over its inaction in the war in Ukraine. Of course, this is not a new charge levelled against the world body. This, of course, has been a consistent criticism when it comes to a number of conflicts around the world, be it Yemen, be it Syria, just to name a few. So what this has really raised a question is when it comes to the possibility of UN Security Council reform. We have seen action just this week at the Security Council and at the UN General Assembly. Of course, we have seen that vote at the General Assembly, which means that going forward, if a Security Council veto-wielding power, of course, Russia is included in those 5 nations of the 15 that hold a veto power, that will then trigger a meeting at the General Assembly, which, while it won't prevent the power of a veto, it at least provide those nations that use it an opportunity where they'll be forced to then explain their actions. So, of course, we've seen there a little bit of action when it comes to accountability for the UN, but when it comes to the wider issues of being able to put strict sanctions in place, things like that, because, of course, the Security Council is the biggest body at the UN with the most teeth. There, at the moment, there's very little source of change, considering the fact that Russia is one of the 5 permanent members.
William, there have been concerns from countries that border Ukraine of the war spilling over to their territories. Is this worry still prevalent, and what are some of the government assurances to their people?
It's certainly a massive concern for example, if you take Poland, they've been warning that this is a fight that could well spill over beyond Ukraine's borders for a long time. That's also a message we're hearing from Kyiv's officials, trying to persuade the likes of NATO and European powers, its allies, to do more when it comes to helping their fight. The message we're hearing from Kyiv is that this is a fight that will not just be contained within Ukraine's borders if left unchecked. The message from Kyiv is that this will then spill over into Eastern Europe, into the rest of Europe, and potentially impacting the world as well. So that is why Kyiv is urging European partners, NATO powers, to do more when it comes to providing what Dmytro Kuleba, the country's foreign minister, is calling security guarantees. They say that they're frustrated that they were denied access and entry into NATO, and they're now calling for NATO members to do more to provide them with security assistance as they continue to try and repel Russian advances. So very much the message coming from those neighbours with Ukraine and with Russia is that more action is needed, because there are real concerns here in Eastern Europe as well as in Kyiv that this is potentially a conflict not just confined to the borders of Ukraine.
Finally, William, what's the view of leaders in the Baltic nations over the United States' continued arming and also funding of Ukraine?
Well, there's certainly a degree of consensus, a degree of support. We understand that foreign ministers will be convening again this Friday to discuss the latest developments in the war, but there is a real concern. I mean, of course, we've seen Baltic nations as well as Scandinavian nations, those geographically close to Russia, very much siding with Ukraine when it comes to their condemnation. There is a huge feeling of trepidation. That's why there are strong urges of support, be it with rhetoric or with action. And of course that logistical support that Ukraine has so been craving. This of course is something that is right on the doorstep of these nations here in the Baltic, so something those here are watching with a huge degree of trepidation.
We'll have to leave it there. William Denslow, thank you very much for your insights and for talking to us today. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.